A former fifth grade teacher slammed with 25 sex crimes charges, and her quote unquote bestie is now charged too. This is the same woman who has a Bible verse tattoo and made a post telling all the haters, keep hating. Now they're both behind bars, and we're breaking down all the allegations. This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Gillespie. It seems like every week we have a new story of a teacher accused of sex crimes against one of their students. It's sick, but it's something we see kind of frequently. What we don't often see is two adult besties both being charged for an alleged scheme against children, but that's exactly what prosecutors say happened in this case. Today's scandal takes us to St. Martin Parish, Louisiana. It's about an hour west of Baton Rouge, and that's home to Tesh Elementary School, where, for a time, 31-year-old Marisa Noel was reportedly a fifth grade teacher. Now, Marisa is one of two defendants we're going to talk about today, and the investigation into her alleged misconduct began on January 28th of this year. And that's when officials say they received a tip for a reported inappropriate relationship between Marisa and one of her former students. Now, this investigation was headed by the Louisiana Bureau of Investigation and eventually was assisted by Homeland Security. The investigation went on for literal months. That is until April 13th, when Marisa was arrested. She faced a few charges right out of the gate, including 4 counts of indecent behavior with juveniles and 4 more counts of computer-aided solicitation of a minor. At the time, St. Martin investigators said Marisa had been having an inappropriate relationship with one of her former students, and that's why she faced those 8 charges. And though those charges are really serious, they're nothing to scoff at, but her charges later doubled and then some just a couple of days later, and these charges are even more severe than the first. Here's how Marisa Noel's charges break down now. In all, she faces 25 felony charges, including 10 counts of indecent behavior with juveniles, 1 count of first-degree rape, 2 counts of child sex abuse materials, 1 count unlawful communications, telecommunications devices, improper language, harassment, and 3 counts of computer-aided solicitation of a minor. Now, those charges were brought when a second former student came forward and more alleged evidence against Marisa was presented to prosecutors. And now here's the kind of tricky part. There's not much out there about what exactly Marisa is accused of. It's difficult because she was a 5th grade teacher, meaning the victims in this case are likely rather young, and prosecutors want to make sure to protect their privacy, their identities, so we don't have all the nitty-gritty details. But based on her charges, we can make some educated inferences. For example, she's charged with indecent behavior with juveniles, plural, meaning there are allegedly multiple victims. She's also charged with rape, meaning prosecutors believe they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Marisa had unconsensual sex with one of these victims. And I say that, non-consensual, because if the victim really was one of her students, they would not be old enough to legally consent. And then, of course, there's the abuse of power. Some states have statutes already in place preventing teachers, clergy, or people of the like from having sexual relations with students, even if they're above the age of consent, because the abuse of power. Whatever way you want to spin it, it doesn't look good for Marisa, and neither does her charge of child abuse materials. This could mean Marisa is accused of having explicit photos on her phone or her iCloud. We're going to talk more about that during the interview, but we can also make an educated guess that prosecutors have some sort of communication up their sleeves, whether it's texts, DMs, Snapchat, something concrete with receipts based on her 3 charges of computer-aided solicitation of a minor. And this is just Marisa we're talking about. There's also her so-called bestie, Cortney Burleigh, who's recently been charged too. Now, this was when Marisa's second set of charges came that Cortney kind of was introduced into this investigation. The Louisiana Attorney General said, quote, "That's when the Louisiana Bureau of Investigation arrested Burleigh," meaning Cortney, "on these charges of her involvement in the crime." She went on to say Burleigh's arrest is the result of an ongoing joint investigation between the Louisiana Bureau of Investigation, the St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Office, and Homeland Security investigations involving the sexual abuse a child under the age of 13. So what are Cortney's charges? They're not as well defined as Marisa's. She's been charged, quote unquote, in connection with Marisa's alleged inappropriate relationships. And she faces 3 charges, including indecent behavior with juveniles as an accessory after the fact and cruelty to juveniles. And we're going to talk about what all of this means during the interview as far as Cortney's alleged involvement and her arrest on April 16th. But here's what we know about her right now. Cortney and Marisa are seemingly best friends. This is a post they made to Facebook. Cortney wrote besties and then had a kissing emoji. She said, "And to all the haters, keep hating," laughing emoji. She's pretty active on social media. She's made multiple posts with her family, and also it's worth noting that she's seemingly religious. She even has a tattoo to prove it. Take a look at this post. Cortney wrote, "A true friend knows your heart and carries it with them through thick and thin," star emoji. "Carrying this reminder with me always," infinity symbol. And then she shows a tattoo. It's Proverbs 27:9. It reads, "Perfume and incense bring joy to the heart, and the pleasantness of a friend springs from their heartfelt advice." How do we go from that, a Proverbs Bible verse tattoo, to being the alleged partner in crime of a former teacher now accused of sexually assaulting 2 students? All right, there's a lot to discuss in this case and no time to waste. So let's bring on today's guest. It's civil sex abuse attorney and former prosecutor, also friend of the show, John Clune. Thanks so much for coming on Scandal with us today, John. And I guess let's start with this. I mean, you and I together have covered a lot of cases with quote unquote bad teachers. However, I don't often see 2 defendants. And again, we'll get into this in our interview. We don't know that much about the second defendant, but in your, I guess, experience, is it interesting at the very least to see 2 defendants kind of charged in tandem with something like this?
Yeah, and we'll have to see what she actually did. It looked like it's probably more like behavior after the fact that got her in the hot water, maybe not so much acting in tandem for the underlying offense itself.
Okay, let's talk about that because it's kind of, I mean, we have one teacher, Marisa Noel. She's kind of our main defendant, and she faces multiple allegations, 25 charges in all. We'll dig into that. But now the new arrest is her friend. They have these posts together that they're besties, basically saying like, haters gonna hate. And her friend has now been arrested and charged, but we don't know exactly what she may have done. I mean, could you hypothesize on why she may have been charged?
Yeah, usually when you have somebody who's charged as an accessory after the fact, that means they did something to help them get away with their charge. They hid them from law enforcement. They lied to law enforcement to get them off the trail. Or what could be at issue in this case may have helped with destruction of evidence.
Oh, okay. So there's kind of a couple of things that she could face. And by the way, the second defendant, Cortney, I mean, she, if that's the case, and is covering up for the allegations that Marisa, the 5th grade teacher, faces, they're pretty severe charges. And again, we don't know that much about the allegations, but based on her charges, I feel like we can kind of gather what she may have done. For instance, one of her charges is computer-aided solicitation. That to me, I'm thinking is likely texting, Snapchat, Facebook Messenger, something of the like, emailing maybe even, talking to one of these students, the alleged victims or survivors in the case, about, maybe having sex, maybe meeting up. What are your thoughts about that charge?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It's going to be some sort of messaging, most likely. Sometimes it's computer based. Some of these schools have computers that are either required or accessible for all kids, and they have a particular platform that the school uses. And so sometimes we've seen teachers use that computer platform as a form of messaging. But whether it's that or some more traditional, like, text or social media app chat, that seems to be the most likely scenario for this.
So likely we're going to have some form of communication here. And in most of the cases you and I cover involving teachers who are alleged of something pretty severe, there oftentimes is some sort of digital trail. And honestly, in any case at this point, because we all have our phones on us at all times, I've seen many cases where teachers, allegedly text like, "Don't tell anyone," or "It was great when we made out," or things like that. Sometimes I've seen that literally in black and white that teachers text, and I truly cannot get over that. Why do you think, in your experience, would a defendant write something so incriminating?
Well, in a lot of these child sexual abuse cases, these aren't bank robbers. These aren't people that are planning how they're going to get away with their crime. They're more focused on, how do I get the access to the kiddo that I'm looking for? And so because of that, you see a lot more free flowing usage of, these chat messages, even though if it were to all blow up, it's the, the star evidence for the prosecution. That's just not what they're thinking about when they're sending these messages.
I wonder if it's almost a heat of the moment situation, like, oh my gosh, we're not going to get caught. This is so dangerous. This is so dirty. Maybe going through their minds, like, oh, let's just do it no matter what. And I guess I do have to wonder how it gets to that point because obviously teachers are taught right from wrong. I mean, we trust them with our students, with our children, and a lot of them by and large are very good people. I know a lot of teachers, great people. But once in a while, same with police officers, people of power, doctors, once in a while we have a bad apple. So how does it go from, hey, I'm your 5th grade teacher, we're going to be talking about 5-paragraph essays today, to the allegations of rape? I mean, is there grooming in there, do you think?
There's almost always going to be grooming in there. It'd be very rare to not have some sort of grooming. And even the use of these messages is an excellent form of grooming if you're an offender. I mean, it's different than before we had this kind of digital era where, the teacher had access to the kid during the day, during school with lots of people around there. Maybe there was an extracurricular activity where they might have interaction. Now you have access to the kid kind of 24/7. So this digital era has become kind of the main form of grooming that we see, and it's effective. You do have the ability to communicate with these kids, at pretty much any time of the day. A lot of kids have their phones. I mean, I don't know if the 5th grader had a phone or not, but if they have phones, they have their phones in their room and they go to bed at night. We put our kids to bed, and if parents don't take their phones away from their kids, then people have the ability to communicate with no parental supervision. It can be, unfortunately, a very effective form of grooming.
Oh, I'm not a parent yet, so I don't really think about all of that. I know that a lot of our viewers are and they have to. And I'm kind of, as you were talking about it, I was putting myself back in that era. I got my cell phone in 7th grade, but I remember kids in intermediate school in 5th and 6th grade having cell phones. It's something that happened. So I wouldn't be shocked if these 5th graders had phones. And of course, before bed, even now as an adult, I'm like on Instagram before bed, I'm sending messages to my friends, whatever. And that, to your point, is terrifying. If a teacher is able to slide into the DMs, send a Snapchat, whatever, talking to the student outside of school late at night, that unto itself, is that a red flag if a teacher is communicating with a student outside of a school email?
Like every single time, that's a red flag. And that shouldn't be happening for any reason. There should be some sort of appropriate channel for communication. Sometimes schools will use an app that allows parents in the school to actually monitor what all the communications are within the school. So you do have the ability as a teacher or administrator to communicate with a child, but it's something that's monitored by, again, like parents and the schools. But any kind of your DMs or text messaging, private one-on-one communications, those communications should never happen. It should always be a red flag. Maybe somebody's not grooming somebody for sexual misconduct, but that kind of behavior shouldn't happen at that age.
It's so hard because I know that kids want their independence and they deserve it too, right? But at the same token, parents have to be very vigilant about these things. I mean, I remember being a kid and being like, Dad, no, you're not going to read my texts. So what, no. However, if I'm a parent now, I'd be like, show me what's in your texts. I need to know what's going on, especially if a teacher is involved. And to your point, sometimes if there's a coach, I know, for instance, my choir teacher, we were in drama after school. So I definitely had her phone number. I never used it, but I had it there just in case. Great teacher, love her to this day, but that was one of the good ones. What if it was a bad one, like the one we're, seeing the accusations against here? And that kind of leads into my next question. Another one of Marisa Noel's charges is child sex abuse materials. Now, this unfortunately is something I've seen in other cases too, where there are allegations that a teacher either took photos or videos of herself that are explicit or asked a student to do that. I mean, what does that charge mean to you? It could be either of the two.
Yeah, it could be either of the two. It could also be photographs or video of actual, sexual contact with the child.
Oh my God.
So any of those are possibilities. It seems likely. I mean, that seems to be why we have so many charges in this case, with 25 underlying charges and only 2 victims, is because there's probably a significant portion of that being the child sexual assault material.
And when you think about that, the fact that, we take a photo or video and it can live forever, that is terrifying. And this is a fifth grader. You're what? I don't know, 10, 11, that kind of age. You're a tween. You're not even a teenager yet. And to have to go through the trauma of something like this happening now. And there's two, by the way, students. I guess that leads into my next question. Is it possible one came forward, there were a couple of charges, then another student came forward and it bumped up to the 25 charges you spoke of? Is it possible there are more students? I mean, she's been a teacher for some time. Maybe another kid could come forward. I mean, is that something prosecutors would consider?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a couple of things that happen in cases like this that probably one of them happened already in this case and could continue to happen is either you get media around the case or you get word of mouth spread around school and you see more victims come forward. Their parents find out about the charges. They talk to their kids, more disclosures happen. The other thing is because of this child sexual assault material, the police start going through the devices. So going through the phones, computers, tablets, whatever they are, and they may find more victims and that leads to additional charges as well. So either one of those two things probably did happen already in this case and wouldn't surprise me if there's more charges down the road.
And everything we've talked about so far is almost, makes my stomach turn. The idea of, a kid being in bed where they should be safe, going to sleep, maybe having texts with their teacher, that churns my stomach. But then the idea of this child sex abuse material we talked about, there could be many different things, whether it's photos of the child, the teacher, other pornographic images. I don't like that, just makes me sick. But in addition, the worst that I've seen so far with the charges here is she's charged with rape. And I mean, that to me, does that mean that she allegedly had intercourse with one of these students?
Yeah, that would be the only version of that first degree rape count would be sexual intercourse with somebody under the age of 13, which is it's about as serious of a charge as you'll find in the entire criminal justice system. The possible penalty is life without the possibility of parole in prison. That's about as aggravated as you can get for child sexual abuse.
When you said under age 13, I know I said it made my stomach turn before, but that really puts in perspective, because even kids having sex in high school, we're like, okay, you think that you're old enough, but you're probably too young. This way too young, first of all, but second of all, can't legally consent because they're not an adult. They're not even at the age of consent here. And it kind of gets me wondering too, moving forward, if this were to go to trial, I do wonder about this student, if they would have to testify, because I mean, maybe there could be some sort of, DNA, maybe they would have to do a rape kit, which would be traumatizing enough. But if that doesn't happen, would this student, their testimony kind of be necessary?
Most likely. It'd be really unusual to be able to prove a case without the testimony of the child. You generally don't get to use the child's statements unless the out of court statements, unless they've also testified in court. So most likely the child would have to testify in court. And, this child, there's a lot on this child's plate, or the two children's, plates, from what they've already been through, what they're going through with the criminal justice system. The trial is something that, is probably seems very scary, but in the list of kind of long-term consequences of what they're going to be struggling with, it's probably not the hardest part of the road in front of them.
Okay, that's one of my questions too, because I do always think about these kids testifying just because of where I work. I work in true crime. I cover a lot of trials, so I see a lot of testimony and I kind of get, pigeonholed into that. But testimony is 1-2 days, maybe, you're up there, you're on the stand. And then the trauma from either testifying, confronting your accuser or person that you're accusing this of. Also, the fact that it happened unto itself. Is this something that prosecutors kind of think about or work with these students, victims of any age, by the way, but also specifically the younger ones, because they do have to live with this for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, the prosecutors absolutely do that. I mean, you don't want to re-traumatize, the child that you're working with, in a way that's going to cause any, kind of long-term harm to them. And so sometimes, part of the decision-making in terms of either whether to go forward with the case, whether to offer a particular type of plea bargain, you certainly want to factor in, what is the impact to this particular kid. And some kids have like wonderful, family support. They're doing well. They're on board. And you get a good sense that, even though it's going to be difficult, they can handle it. There are other kids that whether it's because of the nature of the offenses themselves or other things that they've had going on in their life, they're really in a fragile space, and you need to factor that in more heavily to your plea bargaining decisions. But it's definitely part of the equation for the prosecution.
It's just so staggering when you have to look at the statistics of sexual assault survivors out there. There's so many people that it touches, and it's just hard that so many people have to grapple with it. However, we have seen great cases of people who overcame this kind of trauma, went on to live amazing lives. And that's kind of what I hope for these two kids. And that leads into my last question for you, John. I know we're still kind of early on. We've had a couple sets of charges. Another person was added into all of this. It's kind of, a lot going on here. But what are your thoughts? You mentioned a plea bargain. Do you think that's the route that prosecutors might end up taking in this case? And maybe the defense might like it too, because as you pointed out, with that rape charge, she could face, the rest of her life behind bars potentially. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about the plea deal possibility?
So it's rare that a prosecutor's office just says, we're not going to offer anything whatsoever. But they may make an offer that to the defense doesn't feel like much of an offer. So wouldn't surprise me if the prosecution, this is very, very, like we talked about, this is very, very serious allegations. This is something that's going to be one of the high priorities for this prosecutor's office. And so I would be surprised, unless they have any evidentiary problems with the case, which we don't know about right now, I'd be surprised if they made an offer that was very generous. So they could make an offer, but it could be plead to the two of the most serious charges, one against each of the kids that are involved. Mm-hmm. And like I said, to the defense, it may not feel like an offer, and they may just end up going to trial as a result as well.
I mean, maybe it won't feel like an offer if it's, let's say, 2 charges, but 25 is what she faces right now. I mean, I wouldn't want to go to trial with something like that. I guess we'll kind of have to wait and see how this is going to shake out. We're still kind of early in all of this. It's only been about 2 weeks since she was charged initially, but I guess we'll see where.
Just remember that the one charge is life in prison without the possibility of parole. So if pleading guilty to that is a part of any plea deal, it's really not going to feel like an offer. It's like how much longer can you stay in prison than your natural life?
Right.
So that'll be one of the key drivers. Is the prosecution willing to come off of that charge? And that can be a really powerful motivator for the prosecution in plea bargaining, is if they are willing to come off of that charge of you're going to prison for the rest of your life with no possibility of parole, then there might be some room for a negotiation.
Oh, I could see that too, because if I was her defense team, I would say, okay, well, let's take her hand to trial then. If it's the rest of your life, no possibility of parole, let's do the trial route. So I guess it could kind of go either way. We're still kind of early in all of this. So we'll keep following this case and see what happens. John Clune, thanks for coming on Scandal and walking us through it all.
Anytime.
And that's where today's episode of Scandal leaves us for now. If you like what you saw and you want to see more or connect with me on social media, you can find me on places like Instagram at Sierra Gillespie. Thanks for watching today's episode of Scandal. As always, I'm your host, Sierra Gillespie, and I'll see you next time.